Hello, everybody. It's 9 o'clock on Saturday night. My name is Chris Weuve, and this is Starfleet Tactical. And I have with me Peter Gold, who was here last week. And this is a companion to last week's show because last week we talked about visiting the nuclear ship Savannah, which is at a pier in Baltimore. Do you remember the pier number, Peter?
No, but I could look it up.
Don't worry about it. Because I was going to say it's at pier number X in Baltimore. And now we're going to talk about the Liberty ship John W. Brown and the concept of Liberty ships. And the John W. Brown is at pier number X in Baltimore. They're literally right across from each other. So I did 2 ship tours in one day. And I was reminded about how horribly out of shape I am by doing that. And so here's today's shirt, the John W. Brown shirt, bought in the ship store there. So they were just closing the ship store. And I said, but I have money. And they opened it back up and let me buy the shirt and a hat.
I got a pin.
You got a pin?
Yeah, and some stickers.
Okay. Yeah. You've already got that shirt, if I remember correctly, right?
Yes.
Well, and you're wearing it. So yeah, that's I believe that's a picture of John W. Brown, right?
That's Brownie.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in any event, we're gonna talk about Liberty ships and the concept of Liberty ships in science fiction. And as you may remember from Peter's many previous appearances, Peter is actually a working merchant mariner who is currently on vacation. When he goes on vacation, he's on vacation for months because the rest of the time he's working 16-hour days, 7 days a week or something like approximating that, right?
Yes.
So it's sort of like, that's one of the things about being in the Navy. The only thing that ever changes when you're in the Navy is they have a set schedule for what the food is. So it's like, oh, yeah, I'm eating pizza. It must be Friday. And how that works. And then Sunday, they have a separate brunch schedule. And there were times where I found out it was Sunday because I went to go eat breakfast and they were closed because they're going to do brunch instead of breakfast.
Yeah.
It's very easy to lose track of time. As a friend of mine once said, when I worked at the Center for Naval Analysis, he got sent off as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. I think he got flown out to an aircraft carrier, and his comment was, I said, "Hey, Mike, how was the trip?" And he said, "Well, it was your typical 3-day trip." And I said, "What do you mean? You were gone for way more than 3 days?" And he said, No, it's 3 days. There's the day you arrive, the day you leave, and a really long day in between.
Yeah.
And yeah, that works. So, all right, let me bring up the slides. And so we're going to talk about Liberty ships in space and on Earth. Most of it's going to be on Earth. But one of the things I want everybody to think about as we're going through this is think about the things that are very Earth-like about how we do things. And do those apply in space? Like, for instance, there's built-in assumptions, and I'm going to cover this at the end. There's built-in assumptions. Liberty ships work for particular reasons. They work because you needed to have trade. They work because we were able to build them cheaply. Do these things make sense in a science fiction context? Do they make sense in space? They certainly don't make sense with the space technology we have now, because there is no such thing as a cheap launch. Even SpaceX launches would be insanely expensive if you compared them to anything else except previous NASA launches. And so think about that as we go through. Now, let me start off with caveats. I borrowed a lot of images from a particular video from a website or a YouTube channel called Deconstructed. I just borrowed a whole bunch of stuff from them. And by borrowed, I mean I took screen captures and I'm doing it. This stuff is clearly their images, right? I'm not trying to steal anything. I think everybody should go watch that video. A lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about is sort of a big picture overview. But if you really want to understand how Liberty ships work, there's a couple of really good videos. There's one by somebody called Histograph or something like that. It's also very good. And then there's this one here. And as always, I'm not speaking for my opinion, or I am not speaking for any employer, past, present, or potentially future. My guess is Peter is not also.
Correct.
Okay, so let's see. Nothing has changed in the schedule. I think that I'm going to be out for at least 2 weeks at the end of August because I'm going to have surgery and I'm going to be hard down for at least a couple of weeks. Once September rolls around, I don't know when I'm going to be able to get back. And frankly, the limitation is when I can sit. I'm going to have abdominal surgery. And if you've ever had abdominal surgery, you can walk, you can do stairs, you can stand, you can lay down. The one thing you can't do is sit at a desk. It's like getting stabbed in the gut. And so I don't know how long it's going to take me to be able to sit again. It's going to be at least 2 weeks. I might miss, shows in September also. I'm expecting that sometime in July, I'm going to do some traveling. There's an offhand chance. I think there's a good chance that next week I'm going to do a trip, but I plan on being back in time to do the show. I'm going to do an overnight the night of the 3rd, and I plan on being back at the time of the show. Okay. So that must be the deconstructed video that Melissa must have. Oh no, Peter, you did that, right?
Yes, I put on. It's in that shared document.
Okay. All right. So Peter grabbed it and put it up. That's the deconstructed video. There's a chance that the second week in July, my oldest classmate has passed away. She actually died in April, but they're doing a memorial. We weren't super close over the years, but this is somebody that I've known since kindergarten. Got a lot of people I went to school with for 12 years. Exactly one person I went to school with for 13 years. And so I may go back and go to a place where I won't know anybody, but at least, they were members of her family and her friends and stuff like that. So I'm thinking about doing that in July. And if I do that, I probably will miss a show, although maybe I can do one for my brothers. I don't know. So I'm still sort of thinking that through. And then there's probably a second show in August that I expect that I'm going to, there's a good chance that I'll miss a show in August because I think I'm going to do another trip in August. But all this stuff, once it all firms up, I'll let you all know. The rest of that slide is pretty much the same, except I added combat in CJ Cherry's Alliance Union universe as a quick turn thing. Combat in her universe is really interesting because there's no, she's got very, very high thrust ships. They regularly will pull 10 Gs, and they do not have artificial gravity, inertial compensators, anything like that. So one of the attributes of that is if you're going to do a 10 G maneuver, everybody better be sitting down when that happens in a padded acceleration couch. There's none of this running around doing stuff while the ship is maneuvering thing. And so I got thinking about that, and all the sensors are speed of light, but they have high sublight ships. So there's lots of their scanning technology has something called long scan, which is a predictive thing. Combat in that universe is very interesting. So I'm thinking I'm going to do that. So let's see. That's it for that slide. And then here's the agenda. Like I said, a lot of today's illustrations are from how the Liberty ship actually worked on the Deconstructed YouTube channel. That is not from the Deconstructed YouTube channel. That is actually a picture from Wikipedia. And this is a ship that I could have detailed the science fiction side of it. I just didn't get around to doing that on the agenda slide. So my apologies for that. This is one of 2 working Liberty ships. So I think there's like 4 ships total as museum ships. 2 of them can actually get underway, and they do take the John W. Brown underway occasionally. I think, Peter, didn't you tell me on the order of a couple of times a year?
Yes, if you go to their website, and I can put that in the chat later, you can sign up for it. It's usually a 1-day cruise around the upper Baltimore area. It's not super long, but it's a full day, apparently. It's most of a day. And then twice every 5 years, they head down usually to Norfolk for dry dock.
Yeah, because the ship is immersed in a solvent.
Yeah.
So
But
at the very least, you need to dry dock it and repaint the hull.
yeah,
At the
and as
very
an yeah, and as an operating ship with a U.S. Coast Guard certificate of inspection, twice in 5 years for dry docking.
Makes sense. It totally makes
Yeah.
sense to me. Now, that's interesting because this is a design from 1879 that was 60 years old. The design was like 60 years old when it was built. More than that. No, that's about right. That's about right. 60 years old when they started building them. And it's since been another 80 years.
Yeah.
So this is like a 140-year-old design.
Yep. Yeah. So, other than the steam recip and the economics, it's still viable. You know, it's not like it's not workable.
Yeah, you know, people still use axes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's talk about the Brown in particular. It was built as part of the emergency shipbuilding program, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. It was built in Baltimore at a shipyard that I'm pretty sure doesn't exist anymore. Construction took 41 days. Now, on the one hand, I think the very first Liberty ship they built took like 140 some days, if I remember correctly. And the second one took like 70 days, and the third one took like 50 days because they got much better really fast.
Yeah.
41 days is nowhere near the record. The record was 4 days and 15 hours. Now, that 15 hours told me something very interesting. It tells me they're working on it 24 hours a day, which I kind of assumed, but they're working on it 24 hours a day. So in effect, they built a ship in 5 days. From the time they put the first piece of metal down from the keel to their launching it into the river. Now, they probably still had some fitting out to do, but, you know, the fitting out can't take that long because if you look at this, they launched this ship on September 7th of 42. She did her maiden voyage on the 29th of September of 1942. And she didn't do her maiden voyage from Baltimore. She did her maiden voyage from New York City. So she had to go to New York. I think it was New York. It was either New York or Boston. I think it was New York. So she had to do that trip first before she could then and get loaded and then go. Yeah. For a while. Go ahead.
Yeah. One of the things about the construction is, especially from Kaiser, they introduced the concept of modular building.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of building everything on a slipway or inside of a graving dock, they would start building components in a laydown area and then move them to the slipway and then weld them together from bigger units.
Yeah, and you know that's how we do things more and more. I mean, that's how we build aircraft carriers and stuff.
Yeah.
Today, you do as much of that stuff as you can before you put it together, when you've got easier access to the internals, and then you lift entire things in at once. That's a really good way to do it.
Yeah, it also means that your welding is going to be a lot easier. Mm-hmm. So you'll take a piece of metal, and nowadays they'll weld a whole bunch of stuff flat with the big pieces on a machine, real long welds. Then they'll take them out in the yard, and they'll weld everything down. That's a flat weld, horizontal. Mm-hmm. Then they'll flip the whole thing around to get the next set of welds also to be horizontal, if there's enough of them.
Yeah.
Because a horizontal weld is just so much easier, much faster.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So something that's not going to happen in 0G, but still.
Yeah, this is a comment that Andy Presby's made to me before, is that none of our industrial processes are designed for low gravity, let alone no gravity.
Yeah.
We use gravity all the time to do shit. and none of our processes are so like, oh yeah, we'll just move industry into space. Well, we have to reinvent that industry in order to move it into space. It's not just a matter of we're going to build the steel mill in orbit. It's like, we don't know how to build an orbital steel mill. We don't know how to move move molten steel around in zero gravity. We don't know how to do that yet. You know how to do it on the ground, no problem. Or actually with a lot of problems, if you've ever seen any of the YouTube videos about what happens when something goes wrong during a pour.
Yeah.
I would encourage people to go look those up. They're quite entertaining. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the emergency shipbuilding program. 18 different shipyards, and they averaged by the end, they were averaging 3 ships every 2 days. I think over the lifespan of the program, they averaged 3 ships every 2 days. And so on the right-hand side, each one of those bundles of what looks that framing, each one of those is a separate Liberty ship that's being constructed. And you see the bow of a ship that's pretty close to being done on the left-hand side there. And so they've got these frames up, and you can climb up the frame and get on. There's a picture on this website. I found this website that has all these pictures from shipyards during this program that I pulled these two down from. And it shows like ladders that are wide enough that like 2 or 3 people are climbing up side by side at a time to get on board the ship to do the outfitting, stuff like that. We talk about Liberty ships, but there was also the T2 tankers. There was the Victory ships, etc. So there's a lot of stuff that was included in the emergency shipbuilding program, and the program changed over time as they did it. And as I describe it here, they were cheap and inexpensive. So they cheaped out on a lot of stuff, and they were able to build ships for, on average, about $2 million for a ship, and with a low of like 1.4 million and a high of like 2.9 or something like that. And they did it with less experienced construction crews, because the experienced construction crews were busy building warships. So a lot of these people that did this hadn't necessarily ever built a ship before, especially the women that got pulled in, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. There weren't a whole lot of women shipbuilders, and so a lot of people ended up getting pulled into the shipbuilding business, and so they had to create a situation where they could break it down into repeatable tasks, and they could teach somebody how to do a task, and they could do it well. And the ship was designed to be easy to put together that way. So no fancy angles, etc., etc. Weld this piece of steel to this piece of steel on a long straight line, and that's what they did. So they were simplistic construction using old technology to get there. So, Peter, any thoughts on that?
No, we show in the next slide. Assembly line simplification. There's one story, a woman, she started off as a welder. They gave her a week of training. As soon as she could learn to tack 2 pieces of metal together, she spent a month tacking, prepping metal. It's like, okay, I have to have 2 pieces of metal. We tacked them together in a couple of spots. And then somebody with more experience who could actually run a good weld just run straight down that joint. And a couple of months later, she was good enough that she was now running the joints, and somebody else was doing the tacking. So they built their workforce bit by bit, and that's one reason it also got faster.
So somebody in the comments just made the reference to Jeremiah O'Brien. She's the West Coast Liberty ship that's still in operation, and they take her out to sea every now and then too.
Yeah.
So
and both of them tried to get to D-Day. I don't remember which one actually made it. I think the other one actually had a breakdown.
Well, parts are probably hard to come by. At this point, if you need a part, a machine shop is going to have to make it for you. Luckily, I believe they have a machine shop on board. So because ships as a general rule have machine shops on board. So now I should emphasize, Peter put together this slide. So I'm talking about Peter's slide here.
Yeah.
But I really like this idea that, frequently things happen and people realize, hey, I've got this shortage of manpower, maybe I can throw some woman power at it. And I remember the first time that a carrier captain said, maybe we should convert more of the berthing to female berthing, because if we did that, I can request female sailors and I might actually get those bodies. Because at the time, this was like 20, 25 years ago, at the time, women were allowed to go to sea, but there were specific berthing requirements. And it basically boils down to things like there has to be a certain standoff from the guys. Like you can't share, like a lot of times on an aircraft carrier, the bathrooms are connected. You can just go from one to the other. If one's busy, you can just go to the other one. They're like big bays. And it's like, no, we need to make sure there's a door there and the door doesn't open. And so things like that. It's just basically it's making sure that a bunch of young guys who don't always have the best judgment have enough obstacles put in their way that they can't cause problems. And so in the same effect here, Kaiser realized, there with the war going on, there isn't enough manpower. So let's see what we can do to make this more attractive for women to come into the workforce, to be here. And it included things like 24-hour on-site daycare and pre-cooked take-home dinners so that they could take a dinner home for the family and stuff like that. And that's just fantastic.
Yeah. Somebody comes up with, well, hey, I can't take this job because of X. Oh, we can solve for X.
Steve Jobs famously did it when he was at Apple. He famously asked the question, why do people go home? And because people would, I worked in a software startup, and when we had a push going on, everybody had a couch in their office. The people at offices had couches in their office. They had a place to sleep if they needed to crash for a little bit. All the testers had a couch. In tech support, where I was, we had one or two couches, and frequently, there was one guy who famously, like, he'd stay there 3 or 4 days at a time. The answer that Steve Jobs got was, well, eventually people run out of clean clothes and they have to go home and do laundry. So he put in a laundry so that they didn't have to go home. They'd have a place to go do laundry. So I also like the idea that they took advantage of the fact that women are generally smaller and can get into places to make welds that guys would have a hard time doing. And so, like, specifically the double bottom area of the ship, which you'll see in the schematic in just a moment, that's the women were preferentially, that's a good place for them to go weld because they just fit better. I'm not crawling around in any double bottom. It's just not happening. I'm 6'3" and I weigh more than I should, and so I'm not climbing through any double bottom. The warship yards, though, they were building more complex things. The simple ship construction worked well for not just women but also guys that were not from that. I don't want to make it sound like this is a women thing. This particular thing, it's just an experience thing, right? If you weren't a shipbuilder beforehand, you hadn't been like an apprentice for 5 years before you started being a professional welder. The more highly skilled people were building warships because they needed more highly skilled people.
Yeah, it's the ability to think on your feet because, frankly, the warship plans tended to be a little bit rougher.
Mm-hmm.
Put this together and somebody has to now make a decision on the spot. Guess what? We eliminated those decisions on liberties and victories.
Ryan Szymanski talks about that in one of the Battleship New Jersey Curator talks about that.
Yeah.
In one of the episodes where he said, like, you've got like one draftsman who's doing this compartment and a different draftsman is doing the compartment next door, and they know the two are connected, but they put the door in different locations. How do you decide where the door goes? And the answer is some foreman says, the door's going to go right here.
Yeah.
So you've got plans that are not accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's why you need skilled people that can make those decisions or know when to make them.
Yeah, and warships have extra constraints. These ships were designed to be simple to build.
Yeah.
They were designed, excuse me, they were designed with a 5-year estimated lifespan. 5. And on top of that, they kind of felt that if you made one trip, if you delivered one cargo, they got their money's worth. Anything after that was sort of bonus.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, boy, that's a lot simpler to build than a warship would be. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Do you got any saved rounds on this slide?
Don't think so. Don't think so.
All right, I'm going to start with this sidebar because it's such a great picture of engine telegraphs, and a lot of people don't understand how these things work. They think that these are throttles. They are not throttles. That is a communication device. And you've got one on the bridge, and you've got one in the engine room. And the handle is you sending a signal to the other one. So when they move it back and forth, frequently you'll see them do that in movies and stuff like that. It makes a ringing noise as it goes back and forth. And that's basically, it's the same as your telephone ringing. And then you settle on what you want the other guy to do. Anywhere from full forward to full aft. And then
Stern.
Astern.
Yeah. Full ahead to full astern. Now
the
other, so Liberty ship, it will only have one handle on each station because it's a single screw ship.
Yes, if you've got more than one screw, you got more than one handle because you can actually you can tell them to do the engine separately.
Yes.
In fact, this is how a destroyer pulls up pier side without having a tug. Between clever use of your rudder and clever use of differential settings on your screws, you can actually move the ship sideways.
Yep.
I've never seen anybody do that, but I'm told it can be done.
I have.
And then go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch. We used to do it up on the Great Lakes. Between that and the bow thruster, we never had tugs. 1,000-foot long.
Yeah, but you got a bow thruster. You're cheating.
It's a 1,000-foot long ship. Yeah.
Every ship should have a bow thruster. So you send the signal to the other one, and then there's a smaller, you can't necessarily see it very well, but there's a smaller arrow that points to where the other guy's telegraph is pointing. And so the bridge sends an order down. I want all ahead full, and it settles on all ahead full, and then the pointer in the engine room does that. And when the engine room moves theirs to all ahead full, the pointer up in the bridge goes to that, and the bridge knows that the engineer has answered the bell and has seen that there's an engine order and has confirmed that they're doing it. And so that's how that works. So I previously said that it was an old design. It was an 1879 British cargo ship design that they actually made even simpler. Part of it was just to bring it into modern standards as of 1940, standards for construction, et cetera. But part of it was specifically to make it easier to construct. And if you look at that video, I think either that video or one of the other videos has some pictures, some video of the recreation of the British design, and you can see the differences. It's got different. The pilot house looks different. It's got more windows and stuff like that. And they also modified it for use of oil instead of coal, and so that made it easier. Oil has more greater energy density, and then you don't have to shovel coal, so that's great. They were very austere. There was a lot of things they lacked, like emergency generators and radio detection and stuff like that. They had reasonably short anchor chains. They didn't have a whole lot of heating. They didn't have a whole lot of lighting. And they had a steel deck. And traditionally at this time, you made wooden decks because you were less likely to slip and fall on a wet wooden deck than you were a wet.
Well, it was wood over steel.
Yeah, it was wood over steel. Yeah, I should have emphasized that. It was wood over steel, but they just left it as bare metal. They didn't put the wood cladding on. So like if you go and visit a battleship, it's got a nice teak deck, which they have to replace every 20 years or so. And so that's always a big thing for battleship museums is they're always taking collections for the teak deck. And frequently the old deck gets turned into souvenirs. And so you can get somewhere I've got a coin, a wooden coin that was a teak made from a teak slug from when they redid the deck of the Iowa, if I remember correctly. My brother got it for me. They used reciprocating steam, not steam turbines, because steam turbines were a high tech level thing that was basically being used by the Navy, whereas this was a design from 1879. Basically anybody could build this steam engine, although the victory ships generally use steam turbines. So apparently by that point of the war, they decided they had enough steam turbines available that they could use them for freighters.
Yeah, it was a production bottleneck as to who could make them.
Yeah.
Before the war, there was one factory in the North Shore of, I think it was Salem, but North Shore of Boston that made reduction gear components.
Okay.
So, with a reciprocating engine, it's direct drive. There's no reduction gear. So during the war, it's like, well, okay, if we want to increase production, we also have to divert some to make more production facilities.
Yeah. And early on, they just wanted to pump out ships.
Yeah. So, the merchant ships, well, we can make do with these while we build the tools to build better.
And so they had integral cranes for self-unloading, which is interesting. Think about that from a science fiction perspective. Like if you pull into orbit, presumably you're not landing on the planet. You still have to get the stuff down on the planet. If you're moving to a planet, something like that. In this case, they're just pulling into whatever pier side capability, and they don't need a local crane to do it. They bring their own cranes with them. And so all they need is guys on shore to load it into trucks and take it away, and they can just unload it as fast as they can pull stuff apart. So these ships were slow. The later victory ships were 50% faster, and that's a big deal. But they just kind of decided they were willing to put up with it because especially early on in the war, they were busy building warships and they didn't have enough capacity to, they took lower capability because they didn't have the capacity to make the high capability stuff. Liberty ships are famous for having a structural flaw. A lot of them between sort of lower grade steel and Arctic conditions in the North Atlantic and a lot of hammering. And it wasn't unusual for the ship to just split in two. 400 plus ships had some sort of structural failure, some of them at sea in a convoy, some of them just pier side. There was one ship that literally just went crack and broke in two pier side. Most of the time you weren't pier side when this happened. They eventually solved this they figured out where the place that they were most likely to have that happen, and they put a lot of reinforcement in there. I'm told that the John W. Brown has that reinforcement if you know where to look. I didn't even think to ask the docent about it when we were on board. And then with later on, they just increased the framing to make the hull more flexible, because if your hull is rigid, it concentrates the force in a particular place, and then you end up with a crack.
Yeah.
And so
the thing with the cranes, that was actually fairly standard for cargo ships of the time. The Wright that we went on in Norfolk a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
That had the same thing, and that's a 1960s design.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's actually fairly common, but during the war, it was even more important because you pull into a port that may have been bombed, and now, oh my God, my shoreside cranes are destroyed. Nope. Well, I've got my own. It might not be as fast as your shore-based ones with a high speed, a guy that knows how to run it really quickly. But we can still unload.
Yeah.
and you can also unload to a barge sitting in the stream.
Oh, I didn't even think about that, which is
Yeah.
sort of the equivalent of unloading to the orbit to surface lander.
More like putting it on another orbit, a smaller orbital only thing, and then moving it around in orbit or to the moon rather than moving the whole ship to the moon.
Okay,
is the way I view it. But yeah.
So here's a schematic where you can see all the different pieces. Notice there's something called the tween deck, which is basically the upper part of the cargo hold, but that you'll see that sort of shows up later on, where it's like you get this deep cargo hold and then you've got this other deck up above.
Yeah, you get onto other ships from the 50s and 60s. You got upper tween, lower tween, and deeps. They just named all the different cargo holds or the different levels instead of using numbers.
So one of the things that's interesting to me, remember I was talking about that double hold part that, I wouldn't fit in. If you look at the bottom, the fuel tankage is the orange part. So a lot of the fuel was at the very bottom of the ship, underneath the cargo hold. And when we were in the cargo hold of the John W. Brown, they had this like wooden platform at the like a little bit raised, and the idea was that it was effectively the landing pad. So if they accidentally dropped something, they wanted a little bit extra absorption there, because the fuel tank's right underneath, and they don't want to drop something that's going to puncture the fuel tank, because that could be bad.
Yeah,
it could be bad. So, okay, so here's some top views, and you can see the aft is to the left. You can see that there's a big gun at the very back, and by big I mean 4 inches. There's 2 3-inch guns on the side there, and then there's also underneath all that, you can see it a little bit better in the one below, and you can see it actually better. Let me go back one real quick. You can see there's aft quarters there, and that's basically where they put the Navy guys who were on board to operate the weapons. They lived back there. The crew lived in the deck house in the middle. Then you've got the holds, and they've got a crane there, and they've also got some 20 millimeter anti-aircraft guns. There were a total of 8 of those on board. Those are the circles. The different colored circles in the middle there next to the deck house, those are also 20 millimeter guns. And then you've also got the funnel in the center, and you've got some lifeboats. And then you've got the 3 holds forward and the 2 cranes to service the 3 holds. And at the very front, you got a couple of more 3-inch guns and a couple of more 20 millimeters. Now, this is the fit that they put on ships that were converted to troop ships, as was the John W. Brown. They still carried a lot of cargo, but they'll take some of those cargo holds, like the tween decks, and put racks in there for troops to go on. And when they did that, they generally added more 3-inch guns. They added those extra 3-inch guns in the back. Okay. So here's the deck arrangement at the very top. What would you call that top one?
The monkey bridge,
Monkey bridge.
The monkey island.
Okay, you're going to see it in a second that there's actually an outdoor bridge station, outdoor navigation station. I think it's on the next slide. But then you've got the bridge deck where the pilot house is, and then below that you've got the boat deck, and then the upper deck, which is basically the main deck of the ship, and then you've got that tween deck, and then you've got the main holds. And underneath it is the fuel tanks. And that's kind of what it looks like from the side.
Yeah.
Now, I find it interesting that they got the tanks like that. I don't know how they would maneuver the tanks around.
by crane and winch. Lower it in and use something to push it over.
Okay, yeah, it was the getting it over part that would be hard.
Probably a chain follower equivalent.
Okay, all right, I can see that. I can see that. So as you can see, they're carrying, this one's carrying 10 tanks in that lower hold. This is not a super huge ship. It's not a big ship at all, actually.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I think the next one might be the size comparison. Yeah, there we go. So there's a modern container ship, not even the biggest type of container ship you've got. And that's sort of compared to what a Liberty ship looks like. And so Liberty ships aren't big at all compared to modern stuff.
Yeah.
And that big ship is twice as fast as that small ship.
Yeah, I worked out the math at one point of a TEU compared to cubic meters. I just can't remember it now, because then you can get the number of cubic meters inside of a Liberty ship or a Victory ship and see how many containers worth you could carry. That you wouldn't be able to. There's an awful lot more space that's not container usable on the sides.
Yeah, because there's the hatches. In fact, I think hatches might be next. Oh, we're coming up on hatches, and we're going to talk about the actual hatches there. So there's the deck house. You're actually looking at the front of it, but you can't see the windows on this because there's a structure in the way. But those big flat panels are life rafts, and then it's also got the life boats. And you've got the funnels, and then we're going to go to a close-up of that. So it's only got 3 windows.
I think that's a war design.
Yeah, that cladding on the side, you can see there's sort of bolts there. That's basically asphalt. It's like bitumen mixed with aggregate, and they used it as cheap armor. And they'd put like 10 centimeters on the sides there. And you only have it on basically that deck. And very limited view from the pilot house itself, but you can go out on the bridge wings. If you need to see to the side, you can go out on the bridge wings. And as you can see, there's a navigation bridge up above, in addition to the pilot house down below. And you've got these big air intakes. All the air intakes on this ship are the exact same size. Whether it made sense for it to be that big or not, they made them all the exact same size because it was just easier to not have to store, not have to manufacture multiple sizes. So they made them all the same size.
Yeah, you can adjust them. You can adjust the ducting down below with in the design process.
Yeah. So, but the external features are all the same. Okay, so there's the interior. This is one where the bow is to the right, and you can see the little green guy standing in the pilot house, and to his right, you've got a guy in the chart house, and to his left, you've got a guy in the radio room. And then you've also got on this floor, behind the chart house, you've got the captain's office, and then the captain's stateroom. I mean, altogether, that's his stateroom. He's got the bedroom portion. He's got a separate office. There's a couple of officers on the other side as well. And then in the middle, you've got this sort of dead area that's around where the smokestack is, the uptake going up to the smokestack. And my guess is that standoff is just so that you're not pumping heat into more heat than you want into the pilot house.
It may also be basically the air intake for the engine room.
Oh, on the outside?
Yeah, so the big ducting very well might go there. I'd have to look.
So there's like it might very well be that there's like a duct inside a duct.
Well, you've got the gray stack, and then that whole space there is basically one giant duct. There may actually be, although there may be pieces of it that split off. Yeah,
the gray stack is the outgoing.
Right. Right. But everything outside of that.
So it makes sense because if you look at it, you've got the centerpiece there would be where the gray stack is, and then you've got these big funnels. Where those big funnels going, they're going to that area around the gray deck. So that sounds like that's what's going on there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Because you got to bring a lot of air in for the boilers.
Yeah. A lot of air for the boilers.
Yeah.
So this is what the holds look like. Basically what you've got is a tarp that is strapped down over wooden decking that in turn is laid down over steel beams called strongbacks, and those steel beams are removable. And so they use it, and they slot into special places on each end to hold them in place. And so basically you build the roof, and then you take the roof off when you want to unload it. You take all that stuff off and lift it up, and then you can get down to the hold. And so there you're down to the top level of the hold, and look, there's more wooden flooring. And so it's exactly the same thing as you saw before. There's wooden flooring with strongbacks there. And so you pull that out, and now you can get down to the deep hold.
Yeah. Go back one slide.
Sir.
Yeah. So it was the carpenter's job to check the tarps were wedged in with wooden blocks, wooden wedges every day.
Okay. Yeah. That makes
sense. So yeah, big wooden mallet and some wedges, and make sure everything stayed tight and basically watertight that way.
That makes sense. Oh, and on the right-hand side, you see some of the engines that are used for operating the crane.
Yep. Steam operated on this ship.
Yeah, steam winches, steam operated winches. Everything was steam operated. None of this stuff was electrical. The Victory ships, they started putting electrical stuff in, but on this one, it was all steam. So they're routing steam all over the ship.
Yeah.
So there's the top hold. Oh, I guess I didn't include the bottom hold. Okay, been talking about the Victory ships. They were faster by about 50%. They were a little bit larger. There was only 531 of them built. Whereas there was 2,700 Liberty ships built.
Yeah.
And they did include turbines, and they had electric auxiliary engines for things like the rudder, et cetera. All that stuff on the Liberty ship was done by piping steam around. So like I said, that deconstructed video that I pulled all those screen captures from is just fantastic. It goes into all of this in detail. I especially liked how the rudder is actually connected to the steering engine with springs, because the rudder is going to take a lot of abuse. The ship's going to take a lot of abuse from the weather. And so the springs dampened all that out and prevented the weather from damaging the engine, the steering engine, which is kind of cool. Okay, so now let's talk about science fiction, because this is, at least in theory, a science fiction show. So real world ships are limited by the harbors they'll visit and the cargo type. So, if your harbor isn't very deep, you can't take a deep ship in.
Right. The other part is, and I think we talked about this in a much earlier show when we started talking about containerization.
Mm-hmm.
The bigger the ship, the longer it takes to load and unload.
Yeah.
So
pier space you need.
Well, not just pier space, but just being able to get anything that might be on top.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things, and I remember the Nautilus Museum in Norfolk has an illustration. I want to say it's on the escalator as you're going up into the museum, that shows the depth of all the harbors in the U.S., the main harbors, how deep they are, because that's a draft limitation.
Yeah.
So there's some limitations on this stuff, and you can come up with, like, okay, if I got to get stuff down to a planet, how do I get stuff down to a planet? right? I need some sort of lighter. Maybe a space elevator helps, but I need something to get it down to the planet, and so that sort of limits how fast you can unload stuff. I mean, at least in theory, you might have a big orbital port that you can unload everything to. But if it's in wartime, maybe you don't. Maybe you just leave stuff floating around in orbit, and they come and get it when they can.
Yeah.
So a lot of this drives things like, do I want 4 little ships or 1 big ship? Because maybe I can do more with 4 little ships. I can send 4 little ships to go to 4 different places. Yeah. If you took an entire convoy's worth of stuff and built and put it on 1 ship, where does that ship go? And then you have to figure out, like, what's the optimal way to produce ships. If I can produce 10 ships in the time it takes to produce 1 big ship, but those 10 ships have 5 times the capacity or twice the capacity or whatever, maybe I go with the small ships versus the big ship. Maybe the big ship's actually faster to produce, but I still decide to go with the small ships just because I can spread out the construction more. I can produce more of them at one time.
Yeah. The other consideration could be that a small ship might be able to pull up right next to a warship with 1 mixed load. This is everything for the warship for this warship.
Yeah.
And we'll offload it into your receiving area, and you can sort it out.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. And I can send, I send 10 small ships out, and I've just refitted, 10 super dreadnoughts, and I scoot home, let them figure out how to divvy it up to, the cruisers or something.
Yeah.
And I can do that faster than trying to unload 1 big ship where, okay, this super dreadnought needs to come by to get its stuff, and then this other one on the other way. So an awful lot of technical assumptions there. How easy is it and how fast is it to, how many cargo shells does a ship carry? Glenn Stewart's Starship Mage, they have one of the really huge former Navy auxiliary ships, and it carried a huge number of its own cargo shuttles. So when they pulled into an undeveloped port, they could unload themselves right to the surface. But there's one scene in one of the other books where they pull into a mid-world or one of the high worlds, and they line up right next to a cargo handling system. And what would normally be 4 or 5 days becomes, it's almost like a machine gun going off when they're loading containers.
Yeah.
Fully automated, very, very loud. Yeah.
I sort of bounced off that series a little bit because I don't usually like magic in my science fiction and vice versa.
Yeah.
And I sort of bounced off of that series, but it looks like there's enough stuff in there that I need to go back and take a look at it. So let's see, we got a comment I want to throw up here. Tenders can be used as cargo shuttles. So we built this type of ship called a Lash that Peter actually was on, that used basically the cargo was on board a lighter, and you just carried the lighter around, and then you could take the lighter off.
Yeah. Early form of intermodal transportation.
And very useful for, like, if you need to go upriver with stuff.
Yeah.
And what was the other one called? Sea barge?
Yeah, sea barge.
Sea barge was the same idea, but it was, I think, the Lash ones were powered, weren't they?
No.
Neither one
was powered.
Okay.
Lash was an elevator system. Sorry, Lash was a crane that lifted the barges up and off.
And sea barge was an elevator.
Yep, sea barge was an elevator.
Yeah, so you come in at the end, the end of the ship, and it would lift you up, and then you'd slide onto the deck, so it had a couple of different levels and an elevator that would let you get between them.
Yeah.
So they're both really clever ideas. Both of them fit in the category of solving a problem that most places don't have.
Yeah.
And the places that do have that problem are probably places where, third world countries that have rivers and easy access to the sea. And it was just not an economical thing. So we built one. There was like one or two last ships, right? Two?
Three sea. No, the U.S. had 3 sea barge. The Russians had a few. The Germans had a few. Significantly different for the Germans, I believe, because they were battle loading for some reason. And then the U.S. had at least 2 lash designs, and there was a dozen in each design, I think.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that. I was on both. So
that's more than I thought there was.
Yeah, there's a couple of different designs. There's you sell them in the Marad fleet. I mean, they were still using the lashes up until 1998, 1999.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so solve the problem that, we used them in India, and I was like, okay, well, they finally put in container cranes.
Yeah.
They built enough infrastructure to make the lashes and the lash and sea barge systems not needed.
Yeah, and that's, I frequently say one of the differences between Starfleet and the US Navy is that Starfleet's dealing with an area that's getting ever bigger, whereas, the Earth isn't getting any bigger.
Yeah.
There are no new oceans. And so as a result of that, you have some places. I can imagine that there's always going to be places in Star Trek where the ability to deal with a rough environment like that, something that Lash could do, is, as the periphery expands, I expect those ships to go out further.
Yeah.
But it doesn't necessarily work that way in the real world. Patrick Ross points out in Earth 2, they just use drop canisters. And so, yeah, if all you're doing is delivering to a planet, that makes total sense.
Yeah, Cedar Sanderson, in one of her upcoming novels, if she hasn't already written it, is using the same thing based on the work that you, me, and the rest of BuNine did.
Oh, yeah, the rotary container ship. I still really love that design. I need to talk to Cedar Sanders at some point.
Yeah.
There's also a comment Starfleet made use of robotic bulk carriers. We're going to talk about Starfleet in just a second because this is a science fiction show.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple of books. Some of these were mentioned last time, like The Wreck of the River of Stars and the Trader's Tales from the Golden Age of the Solar Clipper. Those really weren't Liberty ships by any stretch. But they are, there's not a whole lot of stuff out there that has like a Liberty ship sort of point of view. Passage at Arms, the Liberty ships are targets, and they're not really Liberty ships. It's the bad guys that are using logistics hulls to move stuff down. The good guys are, or at least the viewpoint characters, are using something that's a lot like a U-boat to go shoot at them. I point out CJ Cherry's Alliance Union setting because it's arguably the exact opposite. Each of the merchanter ships is a precious unicorn that must be preserved while it's making runs to wherever it's going. But, you can't intercept something in that universe. And that's one of the places where it's different from the real world is, in Star Trek, you could detect a convoy and you could intercept it. You could go after the merchant ships. But if you're doing like a jump drive, when you're in jump space, nobody's touching you. So in the Alliance Union universe, nobody's touching you. In Traveler, nobody's touching you. In the Co-Dominion universe, nobody's touching you. Although at least in theory, there's some places where they could get to you because there's uninhabited star systems. And so we'll talk about that in just a moment. In fact, I think it's the slide after this one. So let's sort of deconstruct Did I talk about that? Okay, let's sort of deconstruct how this works. Liberty ships, Victory ships, T2 tankers, all that stuff makes sense given a specific set of assumptions that translates as the real world, right? Like you move in convoys and you can be attacked while you're in a convoy. And as a result, there can be attrition on your ships. That trade makes a difference, things like that. We'll get into that a little bit more in the next slide. Those things translate into a set of assumptions that define what the real world is. They're not assumptions for us. They're just how it works. But they don't have to be the same for a science fiction universe. I frequently talk about people that just take like World War II or whatever and run it through the science fiction converter, sometimes without turning it on first, and file off the serial numbers and slap in space in the end and declare it done. And if you do that, you've got the same sort of assumptions as we have in the real world, but that isn't necessarily the way to go about doing that. And so, you know, we've got this idea here on the right-hand side. That's a Ptolemy class ship from the Franz Joseph design Star Trek era. Does a Liberty ship make sense in Star Trek? Is there such a thing as a cheap warp engine? Maybe if you've got some old hulls, maybe it makes sense. But seems to me, maybe not in the time period of the original series, but certainly by the time Next Gen rolls around, that ship is going to be carrying that tube, that canister is going to be stuffed full of replicators.
Or feedstock for replicators.
Or feedstock for replicators. But hopefully you can get that locally. And you stuff it full of replicators and you go to wherever you need to produce the stuff to fight the war, and you just produce it locally. So even though we do have some things occasionally showing up in Star Trek, especially in like the animated series, that kind of look like maybe there might be convoys or whatever, I'm not sure that makes sense in this universe.
Yeah, I mean, Star Trek is much more Cold War or post-Cold War, than World War II. You know, another one of those assumptions. What?
We were prepared to convoy to Europe.
Yeah,
but it's
Operation Reforger.
It's not clear to me that we were going to be building Liberty ships to do that, though.
No, not since we had so many laid up.
Yeah, that was going to be a come-as-you-are war.
Yeah, that was the assumption. Yeah, I mean, that's the other problem when somebody tries to recreate, I'm going to just recreate World War II ships or World War II, and they miss a lot of the underlying assumptions that made those decisions.
Yeah, and that's the reason why I when push comes to shove, that's the reason why I'm doing this show.
Yeah.
Is that, you know, I think it's great for people to go out and design their own science fiction universes. I think it's great for people to watch other people's and read other people's science fiction universes. I want people to be either an educated consumer of those products or an educated producer of those products. If you decide to do World War II in space, you should make that decision because you want to do World War II in space, not because you don't understand, you don't know any better, and you just sort of did it because, oh, well, that must be the way it works. It's like, no, it should be specific decisions, and you should understand the implications of those decisions. So Mark Plott says many Starfleet freighters use older engines, like on Kobayashi Maru class starships. Faster ones use TOS engines, the F1 type, which I think means he's a FASA guy, because I believe the F1 type is specifically from FASA. Alam says, I think the Federation might rarely be desperate enough to build lots of new cheap freighters, except maybe by Starfleet standards comparatively. Yeah, I wonder how much stuff they need to move around like that. That's different than sort of like combat support for the fleet, right? Remember, the Liberty ships weren't there. The Liberty ships would carry troops, yes, and they would carry tanks and things like that. But it wasn't just about supporting the U.S. Army wherever it was. It was also about, just giving stuff to the Brits. In some cases, they were shipping food and just machine goods, stuff like that too. So,
yeah, the Arctic convoys to Russia.
Yeah, the convoys to Russia. We sent them 3 meals for every member of the Red Army for the duration of the war. Basically, is what it boiled down to. We sent that much food over, and we sent them trucks because they were busy building tanks. So we sent them trucks, and we sent them some tanks. There were units that used Pershings, or units that used Shermans. I mean, sent them a lot of trucks. Okay, so what are the assumptions of the real world? Well, first of all, that trade is necessary, and by that I mean that that I can't just mine asteroids and produce everything locally with my replicator if I'm in a Star Trek universe, or my 3D printer that's using feedstock, or whatever magic technology I use to turn asteroids into finished goods. It makes the assumption that you actually have to ship stuff as opposed to just computer files. And that may or may not be a good assumption. And, in World War II, the Brits were an island and they had a food import problem and some other issues. They needed some stuff. The Russians didn't have the production capability that they needed. But think about it if this was the other way. What if it's a case that the United States is being blockaded or something like that, and other people are trying to run the blockade to bring us stuff? Would we need stuff in that situation? Or do we, as people that have an entire continent at our beck and call, did we have the wherewithal that we could just do everything domestically if we had to?
We used to.
World War II, I think we did.
Yeah.
There
was some critical equipment, critical inputs we needed,
but they were few and far between. And unlike in England needed fuel. We had tankers to take them fuel. They needed fuel oil and stuff like that. We didn't need that stuff. We were exporting it. We were sending it to England, right? We were sending it to Russia. We were sending it other places.
Yeah.
Because we we were the number one oil producer. We didn't have to import oil.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, it really sort of depends upon what the country is on Earth as to whether trade is necessary. You start adding in the technology aspects of it if you're talking about science fiction. Like I said in Star Trek, do you need it? If you've got replicators, what do you actually need from the rest of the world? Maybe I just need to be able to get to the asteroid belt. Now, in Jerry Pournell's Codominium series, planets are self-sufficient by policy. There's a talk about in Moten God's Eye about how it's just insane to ship food to a world. And so the emperor has decreed that everybody will be self-sufficient by policy because they had some disasters. So everybody has to be able to provide their own food. I don't know how that shifts into other minerals and stuff like that. Whether that sense of autarky includes that, but it, at least for food, there wasn't the equivalent of either, Britain in World War II or the Athenians in the Peloponnesian War where they couldn't feed themselves. Another assumption is that freighters can be mass produced cheaply. If your freighter is super duper expensive, then you're not getting something that's an equivalent of a Liberty ship. You may build extras, but the Liberty ship was fundamentally based upon the idea that it only had to make one trip for it to be considered worth the effort. It paid for itself in one trip. They were treated as disposable ships. They only had a 5-year lifespan planned, and they effectively treated them as disposable ships. Does that make sense in your science fiction background? Now, it's probably true in something like Traveler, Liberty ships are at a lower tech level, so you're probably building like tech level 12 ships in Traveler, tech level 10 level ships in Traveler to move that stuff around.
Yeah, jump one only.
I'm sorry, what?
Jump one limit only.
Yeah, jump one, maybe a jump two. Although one of the interesting things about Traveler is that if you there's some interesting little places on the charts where, when I go from tech level 12 to tech level 13, it gets cheaper.
Yeah. Well, makes sense.
Well, yeah. Okay. We got a better way to do that.
Yeah.
We don't have to do it the new way. When I had surgery recently for my appendicitis, I went home the next day. The surgery itself took 20 minutes because the technology had gotten good enough that the surgery took 20 minutes. And a friend of mine who had appendicitis, I talked with him at 10 o'clock in the morning. He hadn't gone into surgery yet. At 3:30, he's texting me saying, "Oh, I'm home." He was at the hospital for 5 hours, or from surgery basically till when he was released was about 5 hours. In the old days, you stayed for 2 days minimum. So everything gets easier as the tech level goes up. There's also the issue though about competing for resources or skills, right? If all the guys that can build the high tech stuff are busy, then maybe you have to build low tech stuff.
Yeah, or we've got a massive war, so these ships have this high tech planet will start building warships, and these three lower tech ones, they'll build commercial ships and components that they'll ship in.
Yeah. They can build bunks. Warship bunks are not high tech. So
yeah.
Another assumption is that ships can be intercepted and attacked. I mean, I already talked about that. If you're in jump space and you're sort of your own little bubble, then you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah.
But if you're not in your own little bubble, then if you have to slog it out like you do in Star Trek and you've got magic sensors, people can come and screw with you. So what else might be true? I'm willing to toss out the idea that in any setting where Liberty ships make sense, something like a Liberty ship, pirates probably also make sense, because it means if all the set of assumptions that get you a Liberty ship probably also is such that piracy probably works. I'm kind of thinking about some of the codominium stuff in there, like I think it was I've talked about codominion stuff with both Jerry Parnell, or I've read Jerry's stuff on it. I didn't actually have any conversations with Jerry about it, but I read Jerry's stuff on it. But I've talked with his son Phil about it, because I talk with Phil fairly frequently. And I think it was in one of Jerry's writings, though, that he talked about how a lot of the star systems that they go through are uninhabited, and they don't even know. Nobody's ever bothered to visit the planets in the inner system because the Alderson points are in the outer system and they're uninhabited, and pirates can hang out in uninhabited systems. I personally have a little bit of a hard time pressing the I believe button on that, because I would think that at the very least you'd put some sort of beacon there that says so when you pop in, it's like, oh, the beacon's been destroyed. That probably means the system is dangerous. Or the beacon says, yeah, I've been looking around the system and this is what I've seen. I'm pretty sure there's a ship hiding behind the gas giant. So you should be careful, because I think I detected a ship over in that direction. I think it's hiding behind the gas giant. Okay, fair enough. It sort of struck me as a little bit unrealistic that the Empire wasn't at least instrumenting those systems that people were going to have to go through, precisely because there could be pirates there. Your mileage may vary. Okay, so how would we implement some of these assumptions in a science fiction? Like if you're going to do science fiction, how would you make this work? Well, Stargates have interesting implications, I think, because, at least in theory, if a Stargate is my way of getting from one system to another, I can make a simple box with a simple life support system and simple engines. I can build a Liberty ship and run it through the Stargate. I don't have to have a big fancy warship to do that. Stargates sort of make it easy to have simplistic ships, I would argue. I think travel times tell you how local production is valued. So, for example, in Cosmic Computer by H. Beam Piper, during the System States War, they shipped a lot of stuff in, but I get the impression they were building stuff locally. And it was certainly the case that when the war ended, they said it's not even worth shipping this stuff back. They just left depots upon depots upon depots just hanging around on the planet. The alternate title of that novel is Junkyard Planet, because there was just military depots everywhere. In Albedo, you've got this idea of a very large command carrier that I talked about during the Albedo episodes. And the idea is that it's basically a mobile factory that hangs out in the Oort cloud and builds stuff for you locally. I'll note there's a conceptual problem with that in Albedo because of the way the jump drive works. The star system you're jumping to precipitates you out of jump space. So you have to be at least close enough to the star for that effect to take place, which tells me that you're not sneaking into the Oort cloud. You have to basically go deeper into the system and then turn around, go out to the Oort cloud. And I would think that people would notice. So it seems to me that a command carrier like that only works if you can sneak it in, if you can get to the system before the other guy gets there. Maybe. That's what I'm thinking. I would argue that distance and travel time might mean that you're going to do some things in two stages. Like you've got a big, really efficient ship that takes stuff in the back area. So if you're looking at something like Cornell's Co-Dominion or McCollum's Antares trilogy, you might make several jumps over a period of time with the most efficient ship you can get. But then when you get closer to the front, you might want to spread stuff out a little bit and transship it into ships that are not putting all your eggs in one basket. And you can also send those baskets to different locations.
Yeah, even if it's just different locations within the next star system.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be different star systems. It can just be like this one's going to the station orbiting Venus and this one's going to the station orbiting Mars.
Yeah. It just has to make sense economically or militarily to break them up that way. Because if if the ship is too small, it's like, why are we even bothering?
Yeah. So let's see. I think. Oh yeah, all I've got left is the next week's slide. So, which I'll talk about in just a second. So, any last thoughts on the topic du jour? And then I'll go to the next week's slide, and then I've been doing a pretty good job of catching questions, but Olive came in late and pumped a bunch of questions into the system. So let me take a look at those.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on anything that I've said so far that you haven't had a chance to, that I haven't let you get a word in edgewise on?
I don't think so. I think we're actually doing pretty good here.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go through these real quick. Some of these with Olive and some of the other people. Let's see. He points out, who was it pointed out? Mark Plott pointed out Starfleet needed an exported dilithium crystal. So back in the old days, there was at least one thing that you needed to ship around, which is dilithium crystals and neutronic fuel for some planets. Alum says, come to think of it, Worf was very tired of convoy escort duty in the Dominion War.
Yeah. I haven't watched that series, so I don't know if they turn the sci-fi converter on.
It's the one that I'm spottiest on also, just because of what was going on in my life at the time. I was kind of busy with some other stuff. I need to go back and take a look at it. I've watched all the early Deep Space Nine stuff. The later stuff I'm kind of hit and miss on, and I need to go and fix that. I need to just watch an episode a day, and it'll only take me 2.5 years to get through all the good stuff. Olive also points out on some tech levels, it makes sense for your colony ships to just become your orbital station or even settlement on the ground. Yeah, in fact, I think that's what happens to old starships in the Federation is they get turned into orbital emplacements. DS9 saw armed Cardassian freighters. There's plenty of pirates in Trek. They just don't hit Starfleet. Macross had factory satellites, not only bulk food supplies, troops, but whole starship construction. Yeah, I mean, if you can just move that stuff locally and all you need to do is mine the local system, that works great.
Yeah.
The science fiction version of Straits of Hormuz, where you rock up with more tankers and they can stop. The thing about the Strait of Hormuz is, if that were open ocean, nobody would care, right? But it's not. It's a very particularly bad waterway in terms of like your ability to do stuff. You've got limited maneuverability. The shore is really close, and it's just bad. So it's not the sort of thing you want to do. Okay, so for next week, we've been doing lots of sort of heavy history focus with a little bit of science fiction tacked on the end. I always tell people there are two canonical types of shows that we do. Naval history with some science fiction flavoring and science fiction with some naval history flavoring. I think it's time to move away from the heavy history focus for next week and do another, what I call inner 12-year-old episode. And so let's take a look at this specific design, the Belknap class strike cruiser, originally done by, I think, Mastercom Data Center. This is totally a fan design, although it showed up in Ships of the Starfleet, or Ships of the Fleet calendar. It showed up in the Ships of the Fleet calendar. John Eves put it in a painting. And so it's at least semi-canon that this thing existed. And it's got this very interesting layout with the quote-unquote routine detachable engines and engine strut framework. And so let's go and take a look at what's been produced for this in terms of blueprint internals and how I think it might actually look on the inside. And if you want to make it make sense, and just sort of some of the things that have been done with it. So I think that's what I'm going to do next week. And my plan is to put that talk together tomorrow so that if I do decide that I'm going out of town on Friday and I come back and get back in town at like 3 or 4 o'clock on Saturday, I've got one in the can that I can pull the trigger on. So that's the plan. Olive points out Belknaps are popular among fan designs. Yeah, I thought it was really pretty cool when it first came out. The design grew on me over time. I'm not convinced that it's the perfect design, but there's something that I really like. I hadn't even thought about Jackal's Guide. Mark Plott says Jackal's Guide has one. Different name. I'm going to take a look at, I haven't looked at Jackal's in forever. I need to take a look at that. So that's on my list of things to do probably before I go to sleep tonight. So I think that means that we're done. Any parting words, Peter?
No, I don't think so. This was actually a relatively short episode, only an hour and a half.
Yeah. I'm sure Alyssa's behind the scenes laughing at that. In fact, I can see her. She is kind of giggling.
I absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Guilty. All right. So, with that in mind, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. As always, I am in somewhat of a mild case of shock that there's 20 people that decided they wanted to spend their Saturday evening listening to me talk. Or maybe Peter talk. Maybe you were listening for Peter. That makes more sense. And so thank you very much. And I'll keep doing it as long as people keep showing up. So, all right, everybody. Thank you very much. See you next time.